In this episode, we talk about Dutch bucket setup and tomato growing, Andy prunes fig tree roots, and Rikki tells us how she starts her transplants. Hey everybody, it's Nick from the Bootstrap Farmer, and we had some Dutch bucket questions, so I thought we would make a little guide. This video is not meant to answer every question, but just some of the more common questions that we get, and if you ever need to reach out and get specific, you can contact me, nick@bootstrapfarmer.com, and I will be more than happy to walk you through questions that you have or my experience. And so here we go. This illustration, not to scale of course, just kind of gives you the general layout, which is concerning most of the questions that we have. So my Dutch buckets that I had in my greenhouse, I had 6 rows that were 30 foot long. Each row had 30 buckets. The 18-inch spacing in between bucket center to bucket center worked out really well for us. And if you notice, they're offset. And so the buckets on the bottom during the lower and lean process for vining crops would go to the left, and the buckets on top would lower and lean to the right. And eventually these things would racetrack, and we're going to see some pictures at the end of this short video that kind of give you some perspective on how that works. It's important to note where you keep your reservoir is a little important. I wanted to keep the water temperature as low as possible, so we kind of sunk ours in the ground about halfway until we hit bedrock, and then we elevated the area around our reservoir with cinder blocks, backfilled that with sand, and then put a roof on top and shade cloth around the structure. And what that did is kind of kept the sun off of the reservoir. And then as we would fill the reservoir up with water, we would wet the sand down, and that sand evaporating that water kind of gave us a cooling effect. So moving along, assuming you have a sump pump in your reservoir, it's going to come in through, we had a 1/2-inch PVC line. And this diagram illustrates one row. We had 6 rows, so we teed off at each row and then had a shutoff valve to control the flow and the pressure coming out of the supply line. So if you were going to have 2 or more rows, just know that that blue line would extend all the way down to the bottom of the page and then tee off as necessary. From that blue line, we would tee off with 1/4-inch micro tubing and then tee off again to the 2 plant sites we had in each Dutch bucket. And at the end of the line, we originally started off with a cap, but in order to flush the lines every now and then, we wound up putting another shutoff valve where we could blow the lines out and drain the tank if we needed to, or a variety of maintenance that was made a lot easier by having that second shutoff valve. If we look at the draining of the Dutch buckets, at the bottom, the buckets kind of curve around, and you'll see that here in a second with some product shots, but they rest over a 2-inch drain line. There's an elbow assembly, and the elbow kind of sits inside of a hole that you can drill inside of the drain line. Keep in mind that the buckets on the far left are going to be elevated, so you have enough fall to go back into the drains and back into the tank. Or some people prefer drain to waste. That's a call that you're going to have to make on your own. I recirculated. Our system was small enough that we really didn't have any troubles, but just know that there's more than one way to do that. So again, each Dutch bucket, we had 2 plant sites per bucket. And so with 128 buckets, we were able to grow 240 indeterminate vining crops, whether that was cucumbers or tomatoes. And then you can also grow peppers and eggplant. In the next slide, we have just a little bit more detail. Keep note that those arrows are the direction of the water flow going into the buckets and then out of the buckets back into the recirculating tank. Up on the very top left, you'll see an icon for a roller hook trellis assembly that we will take a look at in the next slide. So as the bucket is on the ground or on a platform, depending on how you decide to set up, you're going to have an overhead cable right in the middle and in line with typically the drain line, so it's right in the middle. And you use this roller hook, which is a roll of twine on a spool that you can release by squeezing the roller hook assembly and just pulling the line down as you need it. I found that it was easier for me to just drill a small hole at the lip of the bucket and tie that trellis line to the bucket to kind of keep it tight in the beginning and then lower and lean as we go along. And this slide kind of shows the close-up. We had our Dutch buckets elevated off the ground because of where our reservoir was, because of the bedrock couldn't get it all the way down into the ground. But this wound up having another benefit, that the buckets were just above knee height, which made them very easy to maintain. Those micro tubings, they do get clogs in there. Some people like to run drip emitters. I like running mine wide open and controlling the flow with the shutoff valves that we talked about. And this was right before cucumber harvest, so we defoliated the leaves. Then we would clip the cucumbers and then start the lower and lean process. If you'll notice on the right off to the middle of the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Dutch buckets kind of cradling the 2-inch strain line that goes to the back wall, where that 4-inch strain line allows for all the water to go back into the tank. And then you'll see the 1/2-inch piece of PVC running on top of the Dutch buckets, and then the white micro drip, and then the white micro tubing going to the rock wool slabs. You can also notice on the strings that are coming from the roller hooks, the tomato clips. These tomato clips have a little ear on them, and as they hinge over the string, they kind of hold themselves in place in the string so they're not sliding up and down, and then they clasp together, which holds the vine. You get a better sense of the steel cables and the roller hooks that slide up and down the length of the wire. You can see the vines growing horizontally as they've been lowered and leaned, and then vertically as they go back up. And once they hit typically the top of the roller hook is when we would do a lower and lean. You'll also notice one of my mistakes that I made originally with the greenhouse being bought to house tropical plants. We did not put a wet wall in. After we decided to convert the greenhouse over to tomato production, it was a little hot. We did keep a shade cloth on top of there. We did run the ridge vent, which you can see there's 2 fans. One is a circulating vent, and there's another one on the other side. And then the other vent that's just right behind it is a louvered gable vent that would push their hot air out. So we had an intake and an outtake for that. And then to the right of that, you can see the heater that we would employ in the wintertime. This next slide was in the wintertime, so there wasn't as much vegetative growth, but this kind of allowed us to get a really early start into the spring. You can see the plants on the left were very, very small. You can see the plants on the right, especially on the second row, have a little bit more growth on them, and then kind of get a little bit more perspective on how those clips are tied onto the string. And on the picture on the corner of the right, you can see as spring came along that we really had a lot of vegetation, a lot of fruiting, and everything was very healthy. So this kind of gives you an idea of what comes with the Dutch buckets. It's the bucket itself, the lid, the 2 elbows, which actually get put together and is on the inside of the bucket. And then if you notice on the picture on the very far right, there's a little indentation where that sticks out, and that's the thing that you put kind of to hold it in place at the drain line. The buckets are 10 inches wide, 12 inches deep, 9 inches tall. And the picture in the very far right, you can kind of get an idea of the reservoir of water that's kind of always in there. And so as the water comes in top waters, your rock wool slab or whatever kind of media that you have growing in there, it always kind of reflushes and recirculates and then drains back down into the hole and then goes back into the reservoir. And this last picture is just a description of what the Dutch bucket actually does. And in this picture, you see a lot of leaf growth. You see a lot of tomatoes in production. You see the lower and lean. We had that 3-foot platform that we would lower and lean everything with. I really liked that. Worked out really well. You can see that as we clipped, we kept a bucket with us to kind of keep the floor clean. The other thing that I wanted to note is that bar that's in the middle that has that thermometer on there. There's 2 thermostats. One runs the heater and one runs the powered gable vents. So you could set that. I think we had it set at like 90 degrees. So whenever the greenhouse hit 90, which was fairly early in the morning in the summer, the gable vents would automatically kick on and start pushing hot air out and would run pretty much all day. And then, of course, in the wintertime, we would turn those off and just run the heater. So depending on where you're at in the country and the type of tomatoes you have and a whole host of circumstances is how hot or cool you're going to want. Not only the ambient temperature, not only the air fans circulating and kind of dehumidifying everything, but also keep in mind the temperature of the water is going to greatly affect the growth and the health of the plants. And that's our Dutch bucket setup. Hope this cleared up some questions, and I'm ready for some more. So nick@bootstrapfarmer.com. and I'll get with you as soon as I can. Thanks.
Okay, today I have one of our black Gino figs, and this is one of the figs that is a little less common. You can get them probably in warmer areas. They're very common. But for us, it's a favorite, and a couple years ago, we're growing in kind of a sippy pot type of a situation where we had a lot of 5-gallon buckets, and we'd take one, and we had some holes in it. And you can see this one here down below was full of water. And basically what we had going on was we had a weed mat in the bottom, and that was preventing the roots from growing down through these holes in the bottom of the pot. And that worked okay. That did. It worked pretty all right. But we like to move our trees inside and outside. And we also like to keep the roots very healthy because our trees go dormant, and some of them, if they get frosted real hard, we'll lose them down to those roots. So if we're real healthy and organized down below, everything's a lot better. So that brings us to our bags here. And Bootstrap carries some real nice bags. I love growing in bags. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, I haven't been growing in bags, or my plants are in pots, or my plants are in the ground. You can put them in the bag still. If they're in the ground, it's a little bit different. You have to dig them up, and there's probably a lot more graphic pruning going on. This is going to be a little more peaceful here. So we have our plant. You can see the plastic pot did a pretty nice job. We have smaller roots, but they are wrapping around themselves. We don't want that. So today I just have some real simple tools. I got like a really cheapy bonsai kit years ago off of, I don't know, maybe Amazon or something like that. I don't know. This little pick here. You know, we also have, this is the more common little rake. And that's great for some of the feeder roots and things for bonsai. But when we start getting down into some of these 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch roots, they're pretty tough. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to come through here. And, you know, some guys, you can start from the top a little bit too. My experience with the figs, I don't know if you can see in all the nasty moss here. And this is why I like the bags. It helps to keep things a little drier. These roots will grow across the top of the pots. The bags don't get this as bad. And that, I mean, yeah, we're not doing anything with that for now. So you can start at the top like, you know, your classic traditional bonsai and work through it nice and easy. But for what we're doing here today, that's a little light. We want to come through and get these big roots. We're pruning. Just because we're not using shears doesn't mean we're not pruning. Once we get them in the bag, they'll be air pruned, and then we don't have to do it. And that's actually not true with figs. I like to root prune them and repot them either in the same size bag or a bigger bag, probably every couple of years. Whereas, you know, year and a half tops in one of these solid plastic containers. Oh boy. And so you can see here, I have worms in a lot of my plants. And there's an awful lot of castings down here at the bottom. It's holding too much moisture. So this is a very good candidate. Now you can see here where my roots, they're looped back up. Just grab them and pull. That's better. It's starting to pull through with little resistance here. It's actually kind of fun. You see how as you kind of gain, as you make a little progress here, it gets a little easier. There we go. And that's why I like using a single prong. This is quite the mess, so to get in there and try to pull, you know, a rake through it, it's pretty excessive. We're making headway here, and you can see how the bottom of the roots, we got some of these that are pretty heavy. And what I like to do here is we'll get everybody, you know, make it a nice dome, kind of like the top of a tree's canopy. If you have some really, this one's actually looking quite nice. If you have really heavy roots in there, you know, tap root, something like that, try to take it as far up in here as you can. We want all of these to be equals. We're growing in a container, not in the ground. So we want balance. For our trees, tree form doesn't work very well. We do some espalier, but the most productive stuff in a container is generally shrub form because we have many branches coming out. But I get kind of vain with my trees, and I do certainly enjoy having a nice full-size tree, shaped tree. All right, what do we have here? Okay, something of interest going on. See, and this is one of those scenarios where there is no real right answer. I have a couple of larger roots growing up and over each other. So rather than disturb the entire root system, I'm just going to remove them as close as I can to the base of the tree. All right. Now, everybody looks pretty similar here, I should say. And this isn't important what you use, scissors, anything will work. Come through the bottom here. Now you can see roughly the size of our bag, so we know we want to be a little shorter than that. We'll just come in, and with these annual or biannual transplantings, I find that even with something that's doing really well, if I get a third of the roots out of there, clean it up, give it some room, that even a healthy root system is very grateful just for the space. And as I said, this will air prune. But today we need to be very careful when we're doing this to make sure there aren't any air pockets around the root system. You want that root system to have soil between it and the bag all the way around. I wouldn't necessarily call any part of this process delicate, but that would be probably the only really imperative step. Depending upon what you're growing, now with figs, the root system is so robust that damaging them is, even talking about it's laughable, but there are other plants out there that may require a lot more care through the process. Ensuring to keep moisture to those spine feeder roots, keep them out of a draft. We have our fans off for filming over here, but if you're not filming, that might be something you not think of. Don't want your fans on when you're pruning your tree's roots. Those roots will dry out real fast. All right, we can see right here, we've got a spot. Got to get dirt in there. All right, feel around your bag, turn it. Check for weak spots. That feels really nice. Now this black Gino here, we'll water it in. And then in the next couple weeks, we'll take some cuttings and it's gonna blow up.
What's up, guys? Welcome to my plant room. Now, today's video is going to be all about the products that I use that lend themselves to making some really healthy plants. Now, I've gotten tons and tons of questions. Rikki, how do you get your plants to look so healthy? They're so robust and so green. And today, I'm going to tell you. Now, it's been a lot of trial and error. It's been a lot of testing out different methods and different things that work for me. This is just what's worked for me and with my environment. It may be different for you, but the basic kind of overarching theme and framework, can be applied to anyone's growing situation. Now, for me, it all starts from the day I sow my seeds. The health and wellness of that plant starts from the moment that I sow it. Now, it starts with a good, airy, fluffy seed starting mix. It could be whatever seed starting mix or whatever media you want to use, but you're looking for texture over brand. You want something that's really light and really airy, similar to like a coffee ground texture. That's what I'm looking for. And the point of that, and the reason that you want a nice light airy mixture is because your seedlings are just starting to grow. They're still very fragile, they're still very small, and you don't want their root development to be obstructed by, these really heavy, dense, like potting mixes that have really, heavy forest material and bark, and just things that'll get in the way of that. So I'm looking for something really light. So whatever seed starting mix or whatever media you want to use, you take that, and then I will add a root inoculant. Now, I've talked about root inoculants in the past, and I've found them to be very, very helpful in just the overall robustness and health, and it's a game changer from seed to harvest. Let me just say that. And what root inoculants do in a nutshell is they promote vigorous root growth, and vigorous root growth will mean that your plants have better access to the nutrients that are in the soil. Now, by mixing in your root inoculant into your seed starting mix, it's kind of a win-win, right? Because as your seeds are starting to develop, they're drawing nutrients from the soil, to grow and develop and be nice and healthy. And some of those nutrients are going to come from your root inoculant. Therefore, all of that, nutrition and all of that yummy goodness that your plant needs is being taken into the roots that they're developing, and in turn, making them stronger and giving them stronger roots. So it's really a win-win all around. So you can use whatever root inoculant you want to use, but for me, that's like the base mixture. That's what I need to start my seeds. And I'll sow my seeds. They'll do their thing. They'll, I put them on a heat mat. They'll germinate. They'll sprout. All is well. And then once they've developed their first set of true leaves, I'll start to introduce a low-grade liquid fertilizer. Now, I do this when they're about, I would say, 2 to 4 weeks age, when they're about 2 to 4 weeks old. And the liquid fertilizer that I use at this point is very low grade. And you want to start off with something, a little less aggressive, because you don't want to overdo it. Now, that is something that happens a lot, and I see this a lot with gardeners, is they'll use a really strong fertilizer, or they won't follow the instruction, and it will result in, a really big plant, but you'll notice large gapping between the leaves, or you're going to notice some discoloring, or just some things are just going to look a little off. And ultimately, it may not be setting your plant up for success. So make sure at the very least that you're reading the instructions on the back of the packet, on the back of the bottle, whatever it is that you're using. So I use, like I said, a low-grade liquid fertilizer, and I will use that for a few weeks, maybe 2 or so, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. Again, I give myself these windows because regardless, even if you sow your seeds all at the same time, there may be some delays. There may be some, gaps in growth amongst, that set of seeds. So you want to be flexible. So for about 2 to 4 weeks, I will use a low-grade liquid fertilizer, and I will do both a bottom watering and a foliar spray. So I do my foliar spray with my handy dandy hand pump sprayer that I talked about in a previous video. And you want to make sure you get your leaves nice and saturated on the top and on the bottom. So you want to do a foliar spray. And I will switch off, like I said, between that and bottom watering. So I'll bottom water my seedlings, and I will put whatever the designated amount says on the bottle, and I will flood the tray, and they'll soak that all up. And I'll alternate. So we'll do that twice a week. And twice a week, as long as your fertilizer is a fairly low grade, the one that I use is about anywhere from 0.10 to 0.7% available nutrients for feeding, basically, because it's 1 teaspoon per gallon. So anytime you're using a liquid fertilizer, they're usually suggesting it in gallons. So 1 teaspoon per gallon will have anywhere from 0.10 to 0.7% for the specific liquid fertilizer that I use. And so it's not gonna, overfeed your seedlings. So at about anywhere from week 6 or so, for 6 to 8 weeks, I'll start to introduce a stronger fertilizer. And the fertilizer that I use is a fish and kelp fertilizer. Now, this promotes very vigorous and quick growth. So you want to be careful when you're using a fish and kelp fertilizer, because your plant will literally grow 4 inches overnight if you're not careful. And the thought of that sounds great, but in reality, it's not good. And the benefit of a fish and kelp fertilizer is it's organic, and it's a sustainable way to feed your plants. Kelp grows so readily and so quickly in the ocean that it's a great sustainable resource to feed your plants. And I know that's a big, concern of a lot of gardeners. You want to be able to, source good, organic, sustainable resources for your garden. At least I know I do. So I'll do that like once a week because it is stronger. Again, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to overfeed my plants. So I'll do that for about, a few weeks until they're ready to be transplanted outside. And whatever that date is for you, it's going to vary, from gardener to zone to climate, etc. So I will do that from about week 6 to 8 to whenever I transplant them outside. Now, when I transplant them outside, it doesn't stop there. The fertilizing and the health of your plant does not stop there. I will go back and I will use my root inoculant when I transplant my seedlings. And by this point, it will already have, such a great root system because I've been using the root inoculant. So I'll dig my hole and then I will first put it, like any all-purpose plant food, a slow-release granular fertilizer is what I will use. And this will help keep my plants fed, over a longer period of time. And that's why I like, slow-release fertilizers, because at the very least, if you don't want to, do a regimented, like, liquid feeding routine or whatever, compost tea, you don't have to. You could literally just plant your seedlings in a hole with some plant food and, for the most part, they'll be fine for the season. But that isn't ensuring the most successful, most delicious, most prolific crop. So first, I put down a layer of, plant food. It could be any plant food that you like. I just use a granular version. And then I will mix in Azomite. And I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's Azomite. And it's an organic rock, like volcanic rock that's ground up. And what I like it for is disease resistance. So it has a lot of claims. Azomite, you could do your research. It promotes better tasting fruit, more prolific fruit, yada, yada. But what I did notice is the disease resistance was incredible. And this was actually, Azomite was a recommendation from a fellow gardener who was having similar issues in my area. And he was like, hey, you got to try this. We started introducing it to my plants. And he's like, I noticed less disease resistance, or actually better disease resistance. So try it out. It's one of those fertilizers that you can use in tandem with another one. So keep that in mind as well. Make sure you're reading labels and you're doing research and you're educating yourself on the things that you should and shouldn't mix. Like, you don't want to mix 2 full-strength fertilizers, when you're feeding your plants. You just want to make sure that you're staggering the feedings and you're scheduling the feedings in a way that's not going to overwhelm your plants. So, in case you lost it, plant food, any granular plant food will work, Azomite, and then I'm topping with a little bit of soil. You don't want to put bare roots directly on a granular fertilizer. You don't want to burn the roots or anything like that. So you want to make sure that you put a small layer of soil on top of that. And then I will take a small amount of the root inoculant, whatever it says in the bag. You want to add that to the hole, and that you could put directly on your roots. A lot of root inoculants even say you could powder it directly on to the plant. I've never tried that. I just dump it in the hole. But I'll transplant my plant into that hole, cover it with soil, and you water it in real good. And then about a week after that, once it's well established, it's kind of perked back up a little bit, then I'll get back on my weekly liquid fertilizer feeding of the fish and kelp fertilizer. And that'll just be like my weekly liquid fertilizer. And if I miss a week, it's not the end of the world because I know my plant was pulling nutrients from the soil from when I added that all-purpose fertilizer into the hole. So that's the added bonus of adding that granular fertilizer in when you transplant, because if you miss a day, if you miss a week or whatever, it's not going to be the end of the world. So I will just do that, weekly feeding with the liquid fertilizer when I remember, and I'll do that up until, the end of the season. You can even do compost teas. You can even make your own, like liquid fertilizers with granular fertilizers. The granular fertilizer that I use can actually be mixed in with water. You let it sit overnight, you strain out the chunky bits, and that could also work as a liquid fertilizer. So use whatever works for you. Do your research. There are so many types of like additive fertilizers. So, things like bone meal, fish and kelp fertilizers, so many different things that you can add to your soil that are really going to help with the health of your plants. And that's really what this video is about, is narrowing in your focus on what your plants really need. At the very least, if you have no idea, just go to your big box store and get some good organic fertilizer that you can throw in the hole when you transplant your seedlings or when you direct sow your plants. And at the very least, your plants are going to have that to pull nutrients from. Because if you didn't amend your beds, if you didn't use any fertilizers during their indoor life, as you can see here, at the very least, use a granular fertilizer, and that will make a difference. You want to feed your plants just like you feed your pets, just like you feed yourself. You got to feed your plants. They are a living, breathing thing, and they need a little help along the way. So I hope you guys learned something today. If you have any questions, ask away. But if you want the most robust, pretty, beautiful tomato plants, make sure you fertilize your seedlings. Bye, guys.